for those experiencing houselessness as a result of addiction. These are crucial works. Equally important to these programs, however, are the theologies that undergird these efforts. What do we have to offer theologically that can bear the weight of the realities of addiction while also offering a sense of hope for recovery? These are the questions that drive this book. So one of the things that I also hope you heard in there is that I bring a lot of people with me into this book. I bring the people I've met in the basement over the years. I bring the stories that I've read in memoirs on addiction, the stories in the AA Big Book and other big books. And those people are all over these pages. And I especially for memoirs, I quote them and talk about their stories because I think their stories really matter. Theology only really matters if it touches the ground, if it matters to the people that are reading it and listening to it and buy into it. So that's part of why I include so many people's experiences in this book.
So, Jenn, oh wow, this microphone is really on.
It's on.
It's definitely on. So while you have some more water, I just want to thank you again for this amazing work. I feel like I've walked with you through this book.
You have walked with me for so many years.
For some years.
Yeah,
and it is such a huge privilege to see this come to fruition. I was just thinking about Calvin, as you can imagine.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And as you remember, the very beginning of Calvin's Institutes, the very beginning of Calvin's Institutes says that there are two parts of wisdom, true and sound wisdom. True and sound wisdom consists of two parts, knowledge of God and knowledge of self. And it occurred to me that as theologians, I'll speak for myself, as a theologian, I sometimes focus on that first part, right? The knowledge of God, like theology is all about knowledge of God. What you have taught me is how deeply it matters to really know yourself.
Wow.
And to do theology well and meaningfully in the way that you do here, where it hits people's lives, comes from a deep interrogation, painful, vulnerable, honest interrogation of yourself in ways that I think we all benefit from. So thank you for that. I wanted to just, as an opening question, ask you to talk a little bit more, if you're willing, about how we even think theologically about addiction, right? You begin, the very first sentence of the book talks by naming addiction, and the title has the word addiction in it, right? So, theology of addiction and recovery. How do you begin, or how did you begin thinking about what addiction is?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So a lot of addiction literature, not even theological, but secular addiction literature in social sciences, a primary question they're really asking is, what is addiction? And the answer is, we don't really know. There are lots of different theories that people have for thinking about addiction. So one really prevalent theory is the moral failure theory. And I don't think anyone would say, oh, I ascribe to the moral failure theory of addiction. But people actually do. If you think about the war on drugs, that is the moral failure theory of addiction at play. So the moral failure theory of addiction is basically, if you just tried harder and worked a little harder, you would be okay.
Just say no.
Yeah, just say no. Yeah. That's exactly that theory. The benefit of that theory is that you can fix it. So you have a lot of freedom. The problem is that most people actually can't. All the way on the other end of the spectrum is the disease model of addiction. And so this is what the United States currently at least officially holds to. So the National Institute of Drug Addiction defines addiction as a chronic and relapsing brain disorder. And so part of what they're saying is something happens in the brain in addiction that is that really massively changes the brain in important ways. And all the way on that end, if you think addiction is a chronic and relapsing brain disease, the benefit is there is not really a lot of shame because it's a disease after all. The drawback is there also isn't a lot of freedom to do anything about it. And then there are a whole bunch of theories in between. And in the end, I hold to kind of a bunch of theories over here. I think you can't really talk about addiction without taking the neuroscience of addiction into account. I think one of the questions that the brain disease model of addiction answers the question of what happens in the brain by saying, well, that's a brain disease. Other people would say that's just how the brain functions. If you pump a lot of drugs into the brain, a lot of dopamine gets released, and you end up funneling things together that make it so that you have fewer and fewer choices over time. There are also lots of theories that talk about addiction as a kind of coping. So it's also well studied that people who've had a lot of childhood trauma end up often have addiction. Or maybe you know about Rat Park. Bruce Alexander talks about these rats. So they were pumping all these rats full of drugs, right? And then they took them off the drugs and they offered them water or morphine-laced water. And the rats kept on pumping the morphine-laced water. And so they were saying, look, basically if you give people drugs, that's what they're going to end up doing. But then Bruce Alexander said, maybe they're doing that because they're in these cages all by themselves and they hate their lives. And so Bruce Alexander and these researchers created this rat park where they put all these rats together, and there were toys and there was food and there were pals. And they did the same experiment and found that the rats actually chose to have the morphine far less often. So I think some combination of our circumstances, our lives definitely affect addiction. Something is definitely happening in the brain. Is probably, I think you have to take all of that into account when you talk about addiction theologically.
And you, as I recall, found your way into conversation with a kind of old theological concept that ended up, I think, being helpful to you in thinking about addiction in addition to, not instead of, but in addition to these other theories.
Yeah, so what's really interesting is the neuroscience of addiction. I'm not going to go into the details largely because it's not my field and I'm going to embarrass myself. But you should read the National Institute of Drug Addiction's page. They have a lot of information there. I do write about it. It often feels a bit like, I don't know if you've ever tried to explain Lord of the Rings to someone. It's like that. It's just like, they're like, what are you talking about? So I would read it, but the basic gist of it is that addiction has a funneling effect. Over time, so here you have a lot of choices, fewer choices, fewer choices. Over time, your choices get driven in a certain direction. That's really interesting to me. 3rd century theologian Augustine knew nothing about brain disease model of addiction or how the brain works or neuroscience, talks about this funneling effect in theology, and he calls it the bondage of the will. And the bondage of the will is really just that we, so at one point Augustine, I don't know if you know this, but Augustine wrote a book called The Confessions, where he talks a lot about lust and his wrestling with lust. And at a certain point, he says something like, I can't really quote it, but each time he engaged in whatever he was doing was like a link in the chain. And over time, he put these links on the chain and ended up being willingly where he did not will to be. And that, I think, is really the thing that is so baffling about addiction for people is that we have a will and we're rational, but we don't do things all the time that are rational. So if you think about that doesn't really make sense. right? If you think about, like, so this morning I woke up and I chose to have breakfast. I had some idea about what I wanted to have for breakfast, and I had it. And I chose to, you know, put on these clothes, and I went to work. But then there was a moment where I went to Forum. Forum is like, we had this really good discussion in Forum with a really wonderful panel, and they bring donuts to Forum. And I really did not want to eat donuts. And I walked in and I was like, I'm not going to eat those donuts. They didn't even have the ones I like. So I sat down for an hour and then walked out with a donut in my hand. Like, if I were a car, that would be upsetting, right? It's not right that 75% of the time, maybe 50, I can kind of do what I want to do, but 25, I can't? Why is that? And that's really what addiction is asking. What theories of addiction are asking is why does it work this way? And Augustine was asking that question in the 3rd century. Like, why don't we always do what we want to do? And I think if you know the Bible at all, Romans 7, verse 15, the Bible, Calvin, it's all, you know.
That's all. Augustine, yeah.
Right, Paul says something like, I can't quote it exactly, but Paul says something like, why don't I do the thing I want to do, but end up doing the very thing I hate? And I think that's the question that Augustine was wrestling with.
Yeah, so sin. I mean, right?
So, no. Why don't you write the book? I think, so here, I mean, people ask me this all the time, right? Is addiction sin or disease? And I think that's a really hard question to answer. And it has to do with this. Often when you ask people, well, we teach together sometimes, and we teach on sin. And so sometimes we do this thing where we throw out different categories and we ask students, is this sin? So we throw out a thing like stealing. Is it sin? And most people are like, yeah, probably. They can think of some circumstances where maybe it isn't, but yeah, probably sin. Kleptomania. Now that gets more complicated. Is that sin? Well, I don't know. And as we kind of dig deeper and deeper, we get to a sense that people actually think things are sin if you have the freedom and the agency to act otherwise. And so basically the concept of sin has in churches, I think, become flattened to really just become moral failing. So is addiction that? Absolutely not. There are far more complicated and nuanced ways of thinking about sin. And you and actually Susan has written a whole honors project on this, right? There are really great ways of thinking about sin. I am deeply concerned about saying that addiction is sin, even in the most nuanced way possible, because what people will hear is moral failing.
Yeah, and you've helped me with that too, because as you know, I'm a big fan of original sin, and you've helped me to kind of back away from my enthusiasm because of the genuine harm that language. So I think we probably agree that more important than the term is trying to describe this bondage of the will, which is a more helpful term in your account. Yeah.
Where we have a little bit of freedom, but really not nearly as much as we think.
Right.
We really are born into a world not of our own making, and it like infects us in ways that we are not even aware of. So people often give the example of a fish in water, right? Fish doesn't know what water is because they live in it. So I actually have a little piece that I wanted to read about that. Let's see if I can find it.
I think it's page 42.
Oh, thanks, yeah. You just know everything. Calvin, page 1, page 42. So it's difficult to understand what it means to be born into an external condition because we've never known life without it. Several years ago, I had an experience that gave me a glimpse into what it's like to step into an external condition which proved useful for helping me to understand the effects of such a condition on a person. So I took a trip with a friend to the most magical place on Earth, or perhaps more realistically, the most magical place in Florida. From the moment we entered the parking lot, we were immersed in Disney World. Music piped from hidden speakers all over the car park, indicating that we were indeed in a magical place. Friendly parking lot attendants directed us to the shuttle bus that took us into the park. Once on the shuttle, a friendly and slightly goofy host gave us his spiel to get us in the mood for Disney, joking around with the passengers and thankfully reminding us to take note of our parking area and space. The parking areas were named after heroes and villains of Disney stories, reminding us that we were in a whole new world. Music was piped throughout the park, no matter where we went. Even the restrooms offered no respite from Disney joy, as It's a Small World echoed in the stalls. The staff, from parade actors to ride operators to street sweepers, all presented as slightly goofy, ready with a corny joke at a moment's notice. With its attention to the very minute details, Disney transported us from our daily lives and for a moment drew us into a world of their making. The magic and joy of Disney was a condition or situation that we stepped into. It was a condition imposed without through music, props, staff, and so on. Disney created a totalizing experience, such that it was hard to step outside the world they created. Every detail evoked this magical world of goofy joy and reverie. The condition that Disney crafted through its music, props, characters, and more was clearly outside of us. Some of this imposed reverie, however, infiltrated from without to within. For instance, I found myself days later absent-mindedly whistling Disney tunes to the great annoyance of those around me. So Disney gives this very trivial example of what it is to walk into a condition, of an example of what it would be like to be born into a condition not of your own making. And the way that that condition then also infects you, right? Mm-hmm. A much more serious way of thinking about this is things like systemic racism, the patriarchy, heteronormativity. We are so shaped by these conditions that we don't even know that it could be otherwise. So I talk in a queer theologies class I teach, we talk a lot about gender. If you walk into Target and you want to buy clothes for a new baby, there are the girl clothes, they look like little princess clothes, and there are the boy clothes, and they look like little old man clothes. And there is no in between. You have to choose an aisle and pick. And this happens everywhere, all kinds of stores. I love Lego. There used to just be one kind of Lego, now there's Friends. Like Lego has to be pink and purple because it's for girls. I'm not excited. But in all these small ways, we are conditioned into thinking that it could not be otherwise. That being a girl means wearing pink and wearing a princess dress. And I think that's kind of what the condition of the bondage of the will is on a much, much larger scale. We are conditioned in ways we're not even aware of.
So this condition, as you're describing it, imposed reverie, by the way, I just have to say. Such a great line. Imposed, exactly what it feels like. I love it. This is related to your main critique of ways of understanding how it is that we are redeemed from this, right? How do we recover from this bondage of the will? And you describe the way that, at least for many Christians, the narrative of Jesus's saving us from the condition of bondage of the will or sin, it is profoundly unhelpful and even harmful from the point of view of people in recovery. Right?
Yeah.
I wonder if you can just, what is the story that we tell about Jesus' saving work, and why do we need new stories?
Yeah, so I think the predominant story we tell is called penal substitutionary atonement. you might not know that word, but I promise you, you know this theory very well. It's basically the theory that when we sin, we essentially commit crime against God, and God is angry. And there has to be a punishment for that crime. And because God really loves us, Jesus takes that punishment in our stead. Do you all know that? Everyone knows this, right? And I think if you ask most people on the street what they think the Christian notion of salvation is, they'd say something like that. Mm-hmm. So one thing to notice about that is it's a metaphor. It's a courtroom metaphor. So in this metaphor, God is the judge and we are the criminals. We're forgiven, but we never really lose our identity as criminals. We're just forgiven criminals. Mm-hmm. The thing about metaphors is that, so one thing I didn't realize before I came to your class, actually, was that there were other ways of thinking about salvation, that there are other metaphors for salvation. I thought this was a literal description of what happened on the cross. And so to realize that we don't really have access to exactly what happened, because we're talking about God after all, is really helpful. But one of the things, so on its face, I think this metaphor actually sounds kind of lovely, because it shows this God who loves us tremendously. And there are lots of people who see that and really benefit from it. And I don't want to discount that. The thing that I think is harmful about this, for me, and for I think people who carry a lot of shame, is that the metaphor, right, it paints a picture of you as criminal and God as judge. Put that aside for a minute. A lot of people in addiction suffer from shame. And so a lot of psychologists talk about the shame spiral of addiction, where you feel a tremendous amount of shame, and what better way to deal with shame than to drink or to use drugs or whatever it is you do. And that does actually reduce shame for a while. If you've ever even drunk casually, you know that it does definitely blunt your feelings for a while. And so it works. But then the next day you wake up and maybe you ended up doing something ridiculous, or you said something harmful to someone, or you just don't remember what you did. And so you wake up with more shame. And what better way to deal with that shame than to drink again? And so you get this spiral, right? This downward spiral. Now, if you've, everyone here knows Brené Brown, yes? Yes. So Brené Brown, right, talks about like the difference between guilt and shame is guilt is I did something bad, shame is I am bad. Now we can have all sorts of opinions about what shame exactly is, but I think I am bad is the one I want to go with. That's a feeling that I've had a lot of my life. And if you think I am bad, then having a theory of salvation that says, yes, you are bad, you are in fact a criminal, is really harmful, because it takes kind of a God-sized ladle of shame and just slops it right on top of you. And so for I think people suffering from addiction, and I think lots of people who suffer from shame for lots of different reasons, this version of atonement is problematic. And again, it's also very helpful for some people. So I'm not really saying we need to eradicate it. I mean, I would like to, but it's not up to me. I'm just saying, let's use more metaphors. Let's make sure everyone knows that there's tons of ways of thinking about salvation.
Yeah. So yeah, and as you know, and you've taught, there are over the years there are plenty of other metaphors for thinking about salvation, but you went with one as you were thinking about helpful ways of imagining salvation, thinking about describing the this worldly experience of recovery and salvation. You stumbled on one that I think Bill Brown, our Old Testament professor here, might really love. I wonder if you might want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. I went to the Exodus story. Yes.
Oh, sorry, Christine Yoder. Sorry, right.
Christine is also very excited.
Sorry, yes.
The Exodus story, I am not the first to write about the importance of the Exodus story and how transformative it can be for thinking about salvation. A lot of especially womanist scholars do this work. One of the things I love about the Exodus story is you have about, I think, 13 chapters where God frees the Israelites from slavery. Does everyone know the Exodus story? Thank you. The Exodus story is basically, so the Israelites were enslaved by the Egyptians. Maybe you've seen The Prince of Egypt or VeggieTales. And Moses comes, and God calls Moses to go to Pharaoh and ask Pharaoh to let the people go. So Moses goes and says, let my people go. And Pharaoh says, no, essentially. And then God sends a series of plagues. And Pharaoh keeps saying yes, and then changes his mind, and God sends another plague. And eventually Pharaoh says, yes, please get out of here. So you have 13 chapters of that. In 13 chapters, everyone is saved. They're free. But then you have another 27 or so chapters, maybe more, of the rest of the story, which is of these Israelites that are wandering through the desert for 40 years, trying to figure out what it means to live in freedom and how hard it is to live in freedom. And for me, this is like such a powerful metaphor for salvation because it resonates so deeply with my experience of recovery. In early recovery, life is hard. It is really trudging through the mud. So there's this part where the Israelites, when they're in the desert, say to Moses, "Why did you take us out of this place? We don't have anything to eat. Our life was better in Egypt because at least we had stuff to eat over there." And this really resonates with me because in early recovery, your life is legitimately worse than it was in addiction. So if you think about all the things that happen in addiction, right, you might lose money, your spouse's respect, maybe access to your children, all sorts of things, your job. You're dealing with all of that. And let's say you're drinking on top of that. Doesn't feel good, but at least there's some numbing going on. In early recovery, you're dealing with all those same things without the one thing you know that works to deal with them. And so in early recovery, there is this sense of, at least in Egypt, we had something to eat. And what I love about this story is, even though that's happening, the people keep going. They keep walking through this wilderness. And I think, and they have relapses in a sense, right? That there's the golden calf episode where Moses goes up to Mount Sinai and takes a very long time to come back down. And the people build a golden calf to worship. And Aaron says something really interesting. Moses gets mad and Aaron says, basically, I don't know what happened, it just happened. Which I also really related to, because in addiction, there were so many times I would relapse and think like, I don't know, it just happened. As if it happened to me and I had nothing to do with that. So I'm gonna read just a little bit. In early recovery, I often felt foolish when I'd relapse. Boredom with the day-to-day of recovery would make it hard for me to remember how painful addiction was. And this amnesia often led to relapses in early recovery. I felt frustrated with my forgetfulness about the suffering that addiction brings with it. How could I fall for the same thing over and over again? The Exodus story helps to normalize the difficulty of the journey of recovery for those with addiction and reminds us that living into freedom is a lifelong process, that it is tremendously difficult, especially early on, and that slipping back into old patterns is common. The same is true for salvation. God assures us that we are free, yet living into that freedom is a lifelong process. It is not easy to live as free people. It is not easy to step outside the bondage of oppression, the systems of bondage and oppression such as racism, heteronormativity, capitalism that we are born into. And thus we often find ourselves caught in webs not of our own making, in which we are nevertheless complicit and sometimes even active agents of harm. It's easy to get complacent, to lose hope. The Exodus story powerfully speaks to this part of the human condition, reminding us that we are not the first to struggle with finding our way through the wilderness. And they do find their way through the wilderness. I think one of the other really powerful things about the story is it's a community that's traveling together through the wilderness. They're not doing it alone. And if you know anything about 12-step recovery, these are communities of people that walk together through early recovery, and most of 12-step meetings is not so much that some of it is talking about stopping drinking. A lot of it is about living life. How do you live life? How do you live life without drinking? How do you deal with, my car just got totaled. How do I deal with my car just got totaled? How do I buy a new car? I don't know. It's that kind of thing, right? And I think a lot of the Exodus story tells this beautiful story of people walking together through the wilderness and figuring it out together.
Yeah. I just think that's such a beautiful place to end. I think there are other questions, but also not a lot of time. So, so Susan, do you want to maybe see if there are questions to be asked? We'll clap again later. But we can clap now.
I have a microphone, and I'm happy to bring it.
Oh no,
Not Mark.
Not him.
Drink some water.
The two up front know that I often ask the first question. And I had the privilege of asking the text lots of questions along the way. So I don't actually have a question for Jenn. I have a question of Martha.
Oh, now that's not fair.
It's a really easy question, though. Martha,
Yes.
as Jenn answers questions, since you have your phone up there, would you take a picture or two looking this way of us so Jenn can see everybody that came?
That's a great question. Yes.
I texted him today and asked him to ask a nice question.
That's so good.
He did. He doesn't usually, but he did.
Yeah. Well done. Well done.
Yeah, I was getting asked if I was ready. Thank you so much for writing this book. An accessible resource that can be applied, not only theologically, but practically in ministry and beyond is so needed. So thank you for being vulnerable in your experience and writing this. I know that they take a long time, and thank you to all the people who helped you in that. The question for me comes from, I love the metaphor of the basement because many AA groups are in basements and other spaces, and they are in churches. And the interesting dichotomy of that is that religion has wielded so much shame onto many people in their experiences. And so I'm curious about how to bring this kind of conversation to life in daily church and congregational setting. Because we're preconditioned to think, oh, we don't talk about that subject, like many isms and things that are happening. But we need to talk about this. Because it's a part of the body, and the body is a part of the body of Christ, which we all belong to. So I'm curious to hear thoughts on that.
Yeah, I agree that in churches we need to talk about these things. Oh my. And
Done.
thank you.
But anyway, it's all right.
It's really hard to open up spaces to. So here, in the later chapters of the book, I write about this. Often churches will ask me, what should we do? And they think about should we create some programs? Should we do this? Should we do that? Those are all good things. But what we really need to do is learn to be vulnerable ourselves. So we like to create spaces for other people to be vulnerable. It's really hard to actually do it ourselves. I'd much rather listen to you tell your story than sit up here and tell mine. It's easier. So I think part of what we have to do is, so I talk at one point about vulnerability being an act of hospitality. So you being vulnerable and opening up, so let's say that if someone asks you how you're doing in church, church is hard because we're all facing this way. We're not sitting in a circle and sharing stories. But sometimes people will ask, how are you doing? And then you usually say, I'm doing fine, thank you. And then you look up front again. But what if you actually told the person how you're doing? What if you actually said what was going on with you? And I don't mean sort of like vomiting your whole story onto them. They need some time to get to know you, but telling them a little bit about what's going on with you can open up these spaces where there is more space for vulnerability. And I think the more we do that, so we don't put it on people with addiction to start talking about addiction, but we all start talking about our stuff, whatever it is, so that it becomes normal in churches to talk about, yeah, I'm suffering from depression and it goes up and down, and right now it sucks. This is what's going on. That those conversations become normal in the way that it is normal for me to talk about, I broke my leg. There's a whole meal train that comes my way if I break my leg. But what if we did the same thing for depression, or I relapsed? It would be great to have a meal train after a relapse, because a relapse is really hard. And so really creating spaces where everyone is sharing. And what it takes, I think, is us doing it. Thank you for the question.
That's a good question.
Jenn, thank you for the book. I'm looking forward to reading it. I have a sister that struggled with addiction for basically all of her life, and she's now 61 years old. I'm interested in knowing how your family may or may not have supported you. I feel like a failure, and quite honestly, that I haven't known how to support my sister. And she's distant. We're close. She lives in Texas, and she's really struggling. And I'm just interested in what an experience you might have to share with a family member who, and my father was addicted as well. And I grew up in a penal substitutionary church that was very judgmental. It was difficult. So maybe, if you don't mind, your family.
Yeah. I think, so there's this beautiful book called Beautiful Boy. I don't know if you've read that, but it really tells this story of how a family deals with their son who is suffering from meth addiction. And I think what they're really wrestling with, and I think what families are often wrestling with, is this sense of responsibility, anger, sadness. And I think one of the things that the author of that book comes to realize is, I can't fix it. It is not mine to fix. What I can do is walk alongside, support, be there, be the community that they need, but I can't fix it. And I think, so I think that is one of the most important things for families to take on, to realize. So another thing, I have friends in 12-step recovery, some of whom relapse a lot. And I feel that same kind of helplessness because I want my friends to have a good life. And it is very hard for me to recognize I can't fix it. I can be there, I can listen, but I can't fix it. This person has to, so one person talks about doing the things you can to do the thing you can't. So you can't stop drinking on your own, but you can call your sponsor, you can go to a meeting, you can do all these small things that take you there. And so I think one of these friends that has struggled for a long time is now doing really well. And I and some other people met with him for every week for years. I think that is the gift you can give people, to stay present.
Okay, you wanted something to do with pickleball.
Yeah, here we go.
I don't mean to make it light, but you have several of your pickleball teammates here tonight.
Yes.
I know I speak for all of us. We're truly blessed to know you and to have you in our lives and to call you our friend. Were it not for this growing sport, that's the fastest growing sport in the world, we probably would never have gotten to know you. So, how has this fastest growing sport contributed to your journey?
Oh, wow. Is pickleball in the index?
It's pickleball. Do you know, in the acknowledgements, I do thank my pickleball friends. So pickleball, I use pickleball as an example in class all the time. Like, students hate it. I talk about pickleball so much. Pickleball is like a microcosm of the world. I think this is true of most sports, right? You learn things about yourself all the time. So one thing, how pickleball, it contributes to my general growth as a person, in the sense that I can show up and be really great one day. And by really great, I mean just average. And I can show up on other days and be really awful. And I have to kind of accept on days that I'm really awful, like, that's where it's at. That's how I am today. Another thing I've learned from pickleball is something someone calls the pickleball jar. Every now and then, so I am really very average. Every now and then, I have an amazing shot. And my friend is always like, put that in the pickleball jar. Because you might need it later, right? To remember, like, yeah, I do have moments. I have moments of awfulness, but some great moments. And I think in life, you need to have a pickleball jar. Like, put things in the pickleball jar. Think about things that you're doing in life where things are great, because we need those things later on in life. Pickleball has, it has gotten me to exercise, that's one thing. It is the only thing. But it has also just really helped me think about my life and how to you're dealing with these small frustrations and small fun things that help you kind of think about, like, how does this show up in my life? Thank you.
That's so good. That's so good.
I think, coming. I think this is going to be the last question so that we can move to book signing and the reception.
Hello. So I have a question about the language we use around identity. So you talked about people being vulnerable and talking about their stuff. And so I was curious if you had any opinions on how we identify, so perhaps as alcoholics, or how we identify as, like, I say I'm anxious a lot because I have an anxiety disorder. And I wonder if you think that language matters, especially as Christians, and if that should be our first and foremost identity. So hopefully that question makes sense.
Good question.
Wow, that's a great question. So there are, in terms of addiction, there are different differences of opinion on this. So some people think, so if you go to any 12-step groups, you'll know that people introduce themselves as, my name is Jen and I'm an addict. And so initially when I wrote, I used the word addict all the time. I don't use it in the end. I use the word person suffering from addiction, person with addiction, varieties of that. Because I think, so the benefit of people in the basement saying, my name is Jen and I'm an addict, is it really creates an equal playing field. We're all on the same page. Everyone is broken, we know it. So there's something really beautiful about that. But I also don't want addiction to be my whole identity. And so I tend more towards saying that I have addiction, in the way that you might say, someone has depression or anxiety. It is not who you are, because we are God's, and that is who we are. So I really appreciate the question, and people think very differently about it, and I ended up going with talking about person with addiction. Thank you.
Well, I just want to say thank you all for being with us tonight, and thank you for such an incredibly rich conversation.
Thank you.
I feel like I should maybe play pickleball once more. And there's many other takeaways, I promise. But I do hope that y'all will please join us downstairs for a reception of snacks and some fellowship, as well as get your book signed by Jenn. And thank y'all both so much. This has been really cool.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I know. We talked about it there. Thank you. Thank you so much.
No, you sit. You sit. Listen.
And friends, there is an elevator in the back corner if you need the elevator to get downstairs.
Yeah, we can take it downstairs. Let's do that. I'll pour you some more.